advice for the Huron. We're currently sat on advanced flight model, and I'm just going to show you some of the things that we can do with the advanced flight model, and hopefully give you some really good sound sage advice in terms of how to make things work and how to fly using the advanced flight model. So what do we want to do? Key things we need to know as part of the advanced flight model. With the advanced flight model, what you're able to do, you are able to taxi the vehicle as per a normal jet aircraft. You can taxi it, you can move it around the airfield. You'll just see that over there I've actually got a Ghost Hawk ready that if we don't crash and burn on this attempt, so we can go and show you some more advice on the Ghost Hawk as well. But for now we're going to focus on the Huron. If we take a look at the Huron, it's got twin blades, it looks like the Chinook. But as I say, you can taxi this around, you can move it around. If you look at the top left, you'll see what looks like a circle with brackets around it. And if I step on my pedal and then step back off my pedal, those are my brakes. You can see that the gear is down currently. Now then, before we take off, there are some key things that you need to know. I'm not even starting the engine at this point, but if I raise the throttle and then lower the throttle, you'll see the white bar progresses. If you're looking down towards the bottom of my screen, you'll see the white bar progresses and decreases through the collective range. So if I was to look at the handle here, you'll see that if I raise the collective, it gives me more throttle and it gives me more lift. And if I lower it, it lowers the throttle. And so one of the key things about learning to fly the Huron in advanced flight mode is that between this section here, I'll call that roughly 40%, this marker here which is 50%, and this marker here which I'm going to say is 60%, just for the sake of argument. I mean, we can argue over semantics and say that this is 35, that's 50 and that's 75, whatever, it makes no odds, but I'm just going to go with 40, 50, 60. You will find that for the majority of time I will be between those three markers, 40, 50, 60. Now, in order to transition from a hovered flight into forward flight, and again from forward flight into hovered flight, you need to make sure that you decrease the collective and increase the collective back to the middle. So for hovered flight, your collective needs to be in the middle. For decreasing altitude and speed, your collective comes down, and for increasing collective and increasing altitude, it comes up here. But what happens is it's going to be a combination of all of those factors. It's kind of like patting your head and rubbing your tummy that you'll be able to land your Huron. And just while I'm talking, I'm just going to turn the in-game volume down. We just want to make sure that we capture all of the my stuff. So just let me tell you what I'm working with currently, so you know my setup. But this isn't indicative of being able to fly in advanced flight model. It just helps make the experience much more realistic. So I'm using a HOTAS joystick, HOTAS throttle, and a rudder section, which is also by Thrustmaster, as well as Track IR. In terms of the settings that I have the sensitivity for the joystick turned down ever so slightly. So you'd find that there was dead zones, so I've actually reduced the dead zones, so you've got a much more realistic feel in there, but I've just reduced that sensitivity slightly as well. In terms of the throttle and the customization of that, I've increased the sensitivity of the throttle going forwards and backwards, and that's the key thing there. And then with the rudder, again, I just decreased the sensitivity of the pedals slightly, but again, just reducing all the dead zones. We don't need any dead zones. So this is what we're going to do now. We're now going to start the engine. We're going to taxi to, in fact we'll just taxi onto the runway just up ahead here, and then we'll take off, and then we'll show you how to transition into a hover from forward flight, and then how to land the vehicle, which is just the same as any other helicopter. Just the fact that it's you know, it looks and feels a bit different doesn't mean you treat it any different. Now when I'm doing this, the key airspeed that you're going to want to look out for is 70 kilometers an hour. Doesn't matter which helicopter we're talking about. The key that you're going to be looking for is 70 kilometers an hour. So at the point where we slow down to come into a hover or to touch down and land, you need to be at 70 kilometers an hour. And we'll talk you through the rest in just a second. For now, let's turn the engine on. Okay, so as part of my pedal adjustment, as I'm just wiggling it backwards and forwards there, I can turn my brakes off just by pressing down on my rudder pedals. So just as the chopper is spooling up, you can see that I've not actually increased my collective at all, but what I am going to do is just tip the joystick forward slightly and release the pedal, and you will see in a second that all of that built up energy in the rotors is going to allow me to start moving forwards. There we go, just beginning to move now. In fact, I am just going to tip about 5% throttle on there, and you can see now that we're beginning to roll forwards. I'm not moving my feet at this time, but if I begin to press onto my right pedal, I'm going to start turning right, and if I turn with my left pedal, you'll see that I turn left. Now if you had a twist joystick or a joystick or your configured keys for the pedals, I highly recommend it. And it gives you great control when you're in the agile section, which is between kind of like 50 knots to 140 knots in all helicopters. You get full agility of the helicopter, and then really at about 140 knots you want to significantly reduce the amount that you use your rudder pedals, because otherwise you're going to lose your anti-torque rotor with a standard and conventional chopper. Once you start hitting 30 kilometers an hour, you really do need to be maintaining control of the airspeed. The rolling speed. We're not in the air, but the rolling speed of the vehicle, otherwise it's going to tip when you come to turn a corner. About 25 knots is about the max in game. So we're just going to take this onto runway 22 left at the moment. There's nobody else in game, it's just me, but I've just, as a force of habit, I always seem to just look around for hazards. I don't know if that's just tells you what a stickler I am for certain things. Okay, again, I'm just letting the aircraft roll. I'm not touching the joystick now. You'll see that I've completely reduced collective, and it has been probably for about the last 2 or 3 minutes. So I'm just going to turn onto the runway, and then once we're on the runway, I'm just going to increase the collective to around about 40%. And you'll see now that we just begin to increase our speed. And I'm just going to pitch the nose forward slightly. In fact, what I've just done, I've just adjusted my my trim. I'll get to trim probably in another conversation, but for now I've just trimmed the nose of the vehicle down using a hat switch on my joystick. So we're at 58 kilometers an hour, we're beginning to roll, so at about 50% collective I'm increasing to now, and you'll see we get lift straight away. And now I've got control of the joystick, and we are now airborne. I'm raising my undercarriage, and then for good measure and just for professional conduct, just putting my brakes on as well, so that when we land we know that the brakes are actually automatically applied and we're not going to roll into a vehicle or an obstacle or an object. But if you want to do a rolling landing, as you bring your gear down, you then take your brakes off. So we're now doing 175 kilometers an hour. What we're going to do is we're going to turn around, just like you would with a conventional aircraft, and we're going to encourage the vehicle round back to the airfield. Now, in order to transition from a hovering state into a flying state, it takes all the energy that you're pushing down through the rotors to transition into forward flight. What you want to do now is take all that energy in forward flight and put it back down into the rotors. But it's not quite so simple as slowing down, because what you've got to be able to do is we call it transitional lift, because this is essentially now flying like an aeroplane, and what we've essentially got to do is take the whole mass of this vehicle and have it supported by the rotors. So what we're going to do is we're going to come around on the runway, and it was runway 22 we just took off on, so we're going to do an approach onto runway 22 and then land, and we're just, in fact we're not going to land, we're just going to hover above runway 22. The key point here isn't really the landing, it's about being able to hover, and if you can master the hover then you're able to master the landing. So what we're going to do is, once we get onto approach onto runway 22, is we're going to slow down, and we're going to control that slowing down by just reducing our collective down to around about 40%. and then we're going to transition into a hover. But what we need to do is bear in mind at the beginning of this talk is about 70 kilometers an hour. That was a key indicator for an airspeed for us, that once we hit that we had to do some things. So here we go. I'm now going to induce some airspeed loss. There we go. And I'm also now using the rudder pedals as well. Keep an eye on that airspeed. At 70 kilometers an hour we are going to lose all the vertical lift that we've got in the rotors. So you'll see that where my collective is right now, if I leave it where it is right now, we're going to start dropping rather quickly, and that's going to be bad for our health, because as we begin to drop below 70 kilometers an hour, we can't sustain the weight of the vehicle, and the vehicle's going to plummet into the ground, which those of you who do use the advanced flight model will probably already be familiar with. It's not something that'll be you'll be unfamiliar with. You'll keep plummeting and keep wondering why. Well, it's that transitional lift that you're having problems with. So what you want to do is, as you come into the airfield, well, let's get our gear down, that would be a good idea, and we'll leave the brakes on. As we come into the airfield, we're going to reduce our collective as you would do with a standard approach and standard flight model, so that you're maintaining your altitude but also decelerating by bringing the aircraft's nose up above the horizon line. That's just standard anyway. Bring yourself into where you want to be. Bear in mind now our airspeed is now 70 knots, 70 kilometers, sorry. So what I'm actually doing is increasing my collective, while also now maintaining the agility of the aircraft by keeping it pointed where I want it. I'm just being a bit haphazard in terms of the controls, to be honest with you. I'm not really bothered about the controls per se. I just want to show that at 70 kilometers an hour you then need to increase your throttle to at least 50%, if not greater. And then as you want to decrease your altitude, you then gradually decrease your throttle. So the brakes are on, so this is just going to be a gentle landing. There we go. So we just gently encourage the vehicle down. We're going to do that a bit quicker this time, so what we're going to do is we're just going to leap forward quite quickly and aggressively. We're going to get into a quick transition of speed, then we're going to bring the throttle down, get that nose right above the horizon, keep our eye on the airspeed, look at that 80, and we're going to start increasing that collective. There you go, 60 knots, and now again we're already in a good healthy hover. Okay, so we got up to about 150 knots then, and did a rapid deceleration, but still able to maintain a happy controlled altitude and maintain control of the vehicle. When you do make controls like turning in a hover, by the way, you do need to just increase that collective slightly to compensate for any bleed of energy that you have from the blade. So you just need to it's a balancing act between the collective and the rudders and the joystick. So if you go sideways, you're going to start bleeding energy. So it's about just maintaining them high amounts of energy for the vehicle. Okay, we're at 70 kilometers, so we can actually transition back into our flight phase again. I know this is all very, very rushed, but I'm just trying to give you the bullet points. I don't want to talk you through all of the annoying stuff, which is why I'm saying to you 70 kilometers an hour is a key marker for when you're going to transition from a forward flight to a hovered flight. And so what we'll do is we'll just use the beach at Kalataki Bay. It's just over here, isn't it? Or in fact we can actually just use the military base just as an example. So we'll just use an imaginary scenario that we're coming in to pick some guys up or drop them off, whatever. You define the scenario, and we'll go in round the back of the hangars. But yeah, we're going to come in. We're going to start to bleed some of our airspeed now. We're currently doing 174 kilometers an hour. I'm just going to swing the vehicle around using its agility, and look at how where my collective is. I'm now at 80 kilometers, so I really need to compensate now with that collective, otherwise I'm going to drop from the sky. And we were just on the cusp of losing that energy then, so did that just in time. Had I have delayed probably a second or two longer, we would have got into VRS or just dropped from the sky like a stone. I'll show you what VRS is in a minute actually. Now I mention it, I should probably discuss it a little bit more. Okay, so I'm just using a balance between controls of the joystick and my rudder pedals to bring us down to the ground slowly. In advanced flight model, you're not going to fly this like you were flying it in standard flight model. Everything you do has to be considered and pre-planned out, and actually you're taking action well ahead of actually seeing the net result of that action, maybe 2 to 3 seconds ahead of it actually happening. Whereas in standard flight model, it's almost instantaneous, the impact of what you're doing. So it's quite dynamic and edge of your seat flying. If you're going to fly in the advanced flight model, that's not the case at all. You need to get good at your anticipation skills and start anticipating the behaviour of the vehicle. And the more that you fly in advanced flight model, obviously the better your anticipation levels are going to be. So how do you do a rolling landing then, is probably part of the next question. Well, the part of doing a rolling landing, golden rule, you must be doing less than 70 kilometers an hour, and you must be coming in straight and level. So let's do it on this runway. I'm just going to allow the vehicle just to come down slightly, reduce some of that airspeed. And in fact just going to increase the collective at this point, and we're going to use something called ground effects just to help slow us down. Yeah, so there we go, we're rolling, the brakes aren't on, we're down on the ground, 0 collective, and we are now rolling on the runway. And just for evidencing that, so I came in probably a bit too fast at 90 kilometers an hour, but it was essentially a controlled landing. But my advice to you as a new person or as a beginner, keep it at 70, maybe even a bit lower at 50, and then you'll be able to increase that as you get much more accomplished at the controls in advanced flight model. If you're doing it in the Ghost Hawk or any other wheeled vehicle, it's very rare that you'll be able to make it above 40 knots. I say 40 knots, when I say knots I mean kilometres. I don't know why I keep using knots as a measurement of speed. At 40 kilometres an hour, my advice to you is to keep it somewhere between 30 and 25. If you can come in slower than that, that's better, but yeah. Key points: 70 kilometers an hour, watch your airspeed, and once you begin your slowdown and you begin your descent, once you hit 70 kilometers, increase your collective. It will still allow you to drop your airspeed, it will still allow you to descend in terms of your altitude as well by pitching the vehicle up and just balancing that collective. But at 70 you really do need to be increasing your collective to keep that energy down through your blades. And then in transition to forward flight, again, just consider the same thing. At about 70 for your phase 1, and then at 140 is where I would classify as phase 2, where you can't use the agility of your rear tail rotor. So if you're flying a standard helicopter, which is what we're about to jump into in a second, you know, at about 140 you really want to stop using the tail rotor so that you don't damage it or break it. So I'm just now taxiing the Huron over to the Ghost Hawks, and we've also got a little bird there as well. I say a little bird, actually it's not the little bird, it's it is the little bird actually. I was going to say it's not the hummingbird, and it isn't the hummingbird, it's the little bird, which is the mod add-on of the hummingbird. You'll find that Dyslexy, Shack-Tack, he flies it a lot, and actually it probably is the best chopper in the whole game, and it's not DLC either, it's a free mod. Okay, so we'll get the engine off on that one. We're going to get out. Now then, what we'll do first is we'll go to the Ghost Hawk and we'll fly the Ghost Hawk. And what we're going to do with the Ghost Hawk, we're going to apply the exact same rules as the rules that we've just done with the Huron. Now then, we just need to be mindful that we've got there a wall. So rather than taking the brakes off first, what I'm going to do is just taxi it out onto the runway. So my brakes are still on, but if I just put my left pedal down, I'm still able to turn the vehicle like so. Okay, brakes off, and then you'll just find that just a touch of collective. There we go. We're moving. Excellent. Okay, and now we're just taxiing out to the runway. And what we'll do, rather than going round onto 22 left, we're just going to follow this turn all the way round 22 right. And then we'll just do a rolling takeoff on 22 right. And then we'll demonstrate all of the same things in this helicopter that we just demonstrated in the Huron, using those exact same rules. So there we go. Okay, that's nice, and we're just going to increase that collective. I'm just trimming the vehicle actually with nose down again, so it just helps us just build up a little bit more speed for this rolling takeoff. And we'll see what that looks like from the side view. As you can see, I'm raising collective gradually, so I'm going through the collective range. We're at 50%, so we're going to start seeing lift. There we go. And I now have control of the vehicle, and I'm just releasing the trim that I currently had on the vehicle. I'm now also raising my undercarriage, and I've just applied my foot brake, so my brakes are now on. So if I wanted to do a landing, I can do. Now you'll see I've not adjusted the view distance, and so it's rather hazy around. Let me just see if I can do this rather quickly. In fact, let me gain altitude. When I go into MCC and adjust my view distances, it does sometimes cause me to lose a little bit of altitude, so what I'm just going to do is just set it for about 9,500. There we go. It's actually set at 12,000 in-game in terms of my visual settings, but you know what Arma's like. Okay, there we go. So what we'll do is we're going to circle round back to base, and we're going to do that same thing again. We're going to transition from forward flight, and we're now doing 220 kilometers an hour, and then we're going to transition into a hover at around about 70 kilometers an hour. As you'll see, I'm currently at around about 55% in the collective. It makes no odds really if I just left it above 50 or on 50, because we know we've got enough energy in the rotors there to maintain altitude. So what we're going to do is we're just going to come around in a moment. Now when we begin to turn, we're going to begin bleeding airspeed, but that's okay, we accept that because that's part of what we're going to do anyway. So I'm not touching the collective, and I'm currently just gently pulling back on the joystick as well as rolling the vehicle round. No use of pedals at this point, just allowing the vehicle to come around in its own time. I'm just going to get my head over the top of the canopy there using my track IR as a benefit. Okay, and I'm just going to drop my collective now to 0 for a second while I need to drop some serious altitude. I'm also raising the nose of the vehicle up above the horizon line. If you see my artificial horizon, the top dial of the bottom 4, you'll see that I'm beginning to drop airspeed. Okay, so we're currently at 130 knots, so if I put my left pedal and my right pedal there you go, you see that I've got full agility, but it also meant that I bled a lot of airspeed then as well. So gear down as a precaution, and I've just increased collective just for a second there. But we're at 70 kilometers an hour, and now if we want to, we can enter a hover. I'm at 50% collective now. We're at 30 kilometers an hour, but we have control of the vehicle. And now it's just a balancing act in terms of maintaining the vehicle's agility for landing and such like. So just to reiterate, with the Huron, the touchdown speed was ideally in and around 70 kilometers an hour. but with these kind of vehicles, if you want to do a rolling landing, you would really ideally need to make it between 25 and 30, and I'll do that for you shortly. But what we're going to do is just going to go and find a spot where we're going to go and land the vehicle, just to show that you know, with good thought and preparation you can land this vehicle anywhere. You know what, I'm just going to keep us there for a moment. Where shall we land? I do have a favourite place. We'll choose here at the factory at Athera. So what we'll do is gear up. Little tip, if you want to gain speed quickly, just point the vehicle down at the ground and let gravity give you an assist. Okay, so now we're going to go around to the factory. Now, if you've seen many other of my instructional stuff, it's not really so much instructional, it's more advice, hints and tips of things that work for me. You'll find stuff that works differently for you, and you'll perfect your own ways of making things work for you and all that in Arma. But for me, at approximately 1.5 kilometers to about a kilometer, given your experience, I would advise that you begin the process of dropping airspeed. And so for the benefit of this video, what we'll do is at 1.5 kilometers is start bleeding airspeed, while still trying to maintain maybe a 50 meter, so get the nose above the horizon line and just maintain our progress. So we're bleeding airspeed, but as we begin to bleed airspeed, you need to be mindful of the fact that 70 kilometers you're going to begin to drop altitude quickly. So what you need to do is continue to balance that airspeed with altitude. At 140 kilometers an hour we got full agility of the vehicle, so we were able to just tip the nose anywhere we liked. And you'll notice that the brakes are on. And I'm just now allowing the vehicle to come in on the marker, and we're down safely on the actual marker. Now if you were going to be playing something like King of the Hill, you wouldn't be using the advanced flight model. If you were playing Invade and Annex, I do play Invade and Annex, and I do use the advanced flight model. But my routes to and from LZs and drop points are all mapped, are all charted. But you know, if you're going to start using it in those kinds of games where you need to make rapid insertions and rapid extractions, make sure you've got a fairly good degree of competency in terms of flying the vehicle. It's not well liked by people if they can't get down to the ground quickly. So it's good that if you plan and prepare your approach, your path, and you at least give the image of complete and utter confidence to those who are on board your vehicle. And actually also, the better you plan and prepare your journey, you know, the happier you feel as well, rather than leaving it to lastminute.com. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to put the Ghost Hawk down, and we shall swap it to the Little Bird again, just to demonstrate the same rules. So we're just going to come round onto the 2-2 right this time, which is just the smaller, thinner runway. Just bleeding some airspeed. You're at 110. We've got agility, just lowering the gear. That's good. And just there we go. I've actually taken the brakes off now. In fact, you know what, I'm just going to leave the brakes on. Putting the brakes on. What we'll do is we'll land just by the side of the Huron. We'll just take control of this chopper, so I'm going to increase collective there so we continue our drift. There we go, yep. Super. Again, I'm just balancing the vehicle now. Excellent, there we go. And we're down on the ground, nice and safely. Yeah, it sounds like it's shutting down, that's good. Okay, and now we're going to do it in a little bird. Now with the little bird you've got no foot pedal, you can't really taxi it, but again just in terms of the tail rotor, you are able just to press the tail rotor once there's enough energy in there and you can start to just pivot the little bird around. So let's do that now. And there we go, so there's just energy getting in there now, so there we go, we're spinning it around. Excellent. Don't want to get too crazy because the tail rotors are a bit delicate. Okay, off we go. And again, just in terms of the little bird or the hummingbird, you don't need that much collective energy. I've not actually got hold of my throttle here now, I'm just actually flying it like this. And you know what, it's quick enough. If I want to slow down I can adjust the trim just by pulling, trimming the nose back, and it'll just balance nicely. Well, I don't really use a lot of collective with the little bird, to be fair. Keep it nice and agile, nice and dynamic. You know, and if you've got a good spot that you want to land at, then yeah, just go straight in for it. Down and clear, and then let's go. Okay, let's go over to the factory, and we'll just imagine we're doing a drop off at the factory just for demonstration's sake. So again, golden rule. I mean, to be fair, if you rewind this and go back to just when I was approaching the military base in Hummingbird, then you'll have found that I was actually increasing collective at around about 50 knots for the Hummingbird. But let's just keep that rule for now at 70 knots for you guys if you're beginning. If you're watching this and you already know how to fly Advanced Flight Model, then whatever. But you don't really need to be seeing this. But yeah, let's just use 70 knots, 70 kilometers an hour as our indicative airspeed to ensure that we keep everybody alive who's on board the vehicle. Yep, so there we go, we're coming in now, 70 kilometers an hour. Yep, and there we go, I'm increasing collective. Did you see that drop then? If I hadn't have increased the collective at that point, we would have been right in trouble. And there we go. We've used the cover of the factory. I love using this as a drop point. It is pretty good. And then away we go. Ooh. There we go. And then we'll just fly nap of the Earth back to base. So there you go. I hope this has been really useful. It's just, as I say, a bulleted point of view, how to fly in Advanced Flight Model. I'm not going to go into all stuff. Oh, one thing I did mention that I would talk about very, very briefly was the Vortex ring state. Essentially, if I can, let me get back to base, and then I'll give you a demonstration. And for those of you that use auto hover a lot, even in do you get it? You don't get it in standard flight model. You should do though. If you, in fact, let me do it now. I'm going to go into auto hover. There are some good uses for auto hover, but not very many. Like when you're sling loading, that's acceptable. Okay, so here we go. I'm just going to wait for the vehicle to kind of just stabilise. Okay, currently you see my collective is at 50%. I'm now switching auto hover off, and I'm going to leave the vehicle just where it is right now. What's going to happen in a moment, the vehicle is going to begin to shudder violently and begin to drop towards the floor. And the reason for that is the vehicle gets caught in its own downwash. And in fact, I'm just going to reduce that collective slightly so we get caught in our own downwash. And there are only two ways to get out of it. Pick a direction to fly, left, right, or forward and back. Or increase collective quickly while still picking a direction to fly in. In fact, let me put that auto hover on again and see if we can just induce VRS. I think we're going to get into it in a moment because we're going to start to feel that ground effect, and this is when it gets you the most right about now. So are we going to get VRS? Just watch for the juddery action of the blades. No, because we've got too much energy in the rotors. Let me just put it to full throttle here. Yeah, excellent. Okay. Leaving auto hover on. I find it hard to get into VRS, and I know there are some people who get into it really easy. And every time I try and demonstrate it, it does go wrong. Okay, so we're going to just leave the collective where it is. There we go, that's VRS. And that's because we're caught in our own downwash. And let me quickly turn auto hover off, and I'll just pitch a vehicle forward, and then suddenly we're in clean air again. Okay, so that was a rescue by tipping the vehicle forward. I'm going to do it again this time, and I'm going to go higher. Wait till the vehicle levels off. And we'll go back to 40%. There it is, VRS again, and this time I'm just going to full collective, and now look at the recovery time. We're still dropping in altitude. So if you don't have that 5 to 8 seconds of recovery time, you're most likely going to slam into the ground if you're doing a low altitude approach. So my tip to you is, if you're going to be doing flying an advanced flight model, just keep an eye on that VRS, and to know that if you need to get out of it, and you need to get out of it quickly, the fastest and quickest way to recover is to tip the vehicle in a direction, get the rotors out of their own wash. Yeah, so I would definitely recommend something along the lines of you know, a forward motion or a sideways motion, which should help. I hope this video's been a help. I hope I've not rambled too much. I hope I've been concise and clear in showing that the same conditions in all of the vehicles demonstrate and show that you can, in fact, fly in advanced flight model without being too scared, as long as you work to some pretty standard rules. Yeah, and you know, just work at it. Work by them same rules, and you become a master at it. It does take time, it does take practice. You don't need all of the gear. I'm just very one of them fortunate people that does have the gear. You don't need it, just practice with what you've got. Yeah, enjoy it. So I'm going to pop this down on the ground. I'm going to end the video here, and I hope it's just been insightful. Give it a like, give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions, any comments, any feedback, I'm really happy to entertain anything at all that you want to say, or feedback about the video. So yeah, thanks very much, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.